Welcome to the Shaping of the Solway Coast webinar. If you don't know, I'm Claire McFarlane and I'm the Partnership Manager at Solway Firth Partnership. And this is my colleague across the Solway, Naomi Kay, who's the Manager of the Solway Coast Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty. So we started doing these joint webinars because we weren't able to get together to hold our biannual conference. And we would normally use that conference to celebrate the Solway Firth and the cultural and heritage of the marine and coastal environment. And we've obviously discussed a few topics already through our webinars, and because they've been so well received, we thought we'd continue. And this is actually going to be the last one before the summer, so it's really good that we've got the kind of geology aspect of it. Now, we've only run a few of these before, obviously, over the winter, so just bear with us if we do have any glitches with the technology, but we have got Anna behind the scenes to help us with that, so hopefully it'll be okay. So if you want to know, if you want to know anything else about our organisations, then please visit our websites. You can see about some of the projects that we've been working on and all the resources that we have, and there's lots of great images of the Solway, so please do have a look. And I'll now hand you over to Naomi.
So apologies for those people who've been to every webinar and know exactly how this works. I'm just going to run through the technicalities really for anybody who isn't that familiar with Zoom. So this is being run on a webinar function on Zoom. So it just means that you don't have to mess around with your camera or video, they'll automatically be switched off. But we do want you to participate. Most of you have discovered that already. There is a chat option, it should be probably at the bottom of your screen, and you can post comments and observations to everybody in the webinar. So please do use this because we really enjoy it as well. Just click on it to bring up the chat window and type away. Only thing to note is that if you're posting a comment, just make sure that you select the option at the bottom, all panelists and attendees, instead of just all panelists, or your comments will just be seen by the speakers and not by everyone, which isn't quite as good. But we also have a questions and answers option as a button down there as well on your screen. If you've got questions for the speakers, please post them into the Q&A section. And then at the end, like we've done with every webinar, we'll choose some of them, as many as possible, and ask our speakers to have a go answering them. So please do use that. And if you can try and keep it to the Q&A section rather than the chat, that helps us kind of, we don't get confused, which could happen. And then just a final note is that this session is currently being live streamed on Facebook, and it's been recorded as well. And that it will be available in due course on both the Solway Firth Partnership and the AONB YouTube channels. So there's plenty of time to have a watch of it afterwards, or share it with your friends. So it's now time to move on to introduce our two speakers. So we have Phil Davis and Nick Coombe, who are both going to do about 20 minutes or so each. Phil has a particular interest in Lake District geology. So he's a member of the Cumberland Geological Society and also a fellow of the Geological Society of London. In 2018, he published Geology in the Lake District National Park, which encourages readers to visit geosites to examine features that illustrate what he says is the epic history of Lakeland, which is a great term. He provides lots of talks to U3A groups and others on geological topics, wide range of them from time to time. So he's pretty experienced in doing a talk. So Nick Coombe is a landscape architect who over the last 10 years has worked on lots and lots of Solway Firth Partnership projects along the Scottish side of the Solway. So the edge where the land meets the sea, as you'll probably all agree, is a dynamic place. And Nick is really fascinated by the geological processes that have shaped the seashore, but also the resources it provides. Again, Nick has given talks on a wide range of topics, and he's got a great amount of experience visiting the coast over many years, from wildflowers to place names. And he's always found that geology provides the foundations to everything we see. So a good starting point from there. So we're going to start with Phil first. So I'm now going to hand over to him, let him switch on his sound and camera. Here he is, was a cue. We will then depart and we'll let Phil share his screen. Hello, Phil.
Hi, Naomi, thanks for that. And thanks for inviting me to do this. And maybe not so much thanks for setting the bar so high about, anyway, let's have a go. Just bear with me while I do the share screen. If somebody give me a shout when you've got it, please.
Yep, that's up, Phil.
Very good. Okay, slideshow. My computer's running nice and slow, which is always great fun, isn't it? Okay, here we go. I'm Phil Davis. I'm a member of the Cumberland Geological Society and very keen on Lake District geology. Basically, I live nearby and spend a lot of time slogging around the rocks here. Just on this opening slide, I'd point you to the Solway Firth Partnership's website. It's got rather a good section on geology, and I hope I don't contradict it too much tonight. I don't think I will. But there is quite a good summary there. So there's the Solway in the middle, there's north, and I'll show you a better picture in a second. So my job tonight is to talk about the English side, let's call it the southern side of the Solway, which runs from bottom right here up to the central part of the picture and then swings around the corner towards Port Carlisle and so on. That's where we are. So oblique Google Earth view, and I think it shows the scene, sets the scene rather nicely. I'm just outside Cockermouth here, and my Lake District fells you can see there across on the right. So what I'm going to do, excuse me on this, I'm going to start off with a technical bit, and I'm going to end the talk with a technical bit, and the middle bit I hope is a bit less technical. But anyway, there's a good question about why is the Solway here at all? I mean, why do we have this great lump of Scotland, this great lump of England, and the wet bit in between? Part of the story is about the Earth's crust as it widens and subsides, and you get faults along the basin margin. I'll show you some pictures in a minute. And basically a bit of the crust is somewhat lower than the land around it. You've got the Irish Sea Basin, which is another subsiding area, and the Solway Basin is kind of an offshoot of the Irish Sea Basin. Over time, layers of sedimentary rock accumulate in these basins, but there's a long history of subsidence and sedimentation, over 250 million years. So there's lots of geological processes of subsidence, sedimentation, uplift and erosion. And I just ask you to bear that complex stuff in mind. Don't get too frightened by the next picture. Okay, this is a geological cross-section. Geologists love cross-sections of things. So you see a 10-kilometer bar across the bottom, so it's about 40 or 50 kilometers wide. This is the North Channel to the Isle of Man. It doesn't really matter. It just shows the idea of a subsiding basin. So you can see this is these are thousands of meters down the side, so it's an exaggerated scale. But all these basins, like the Solway Basin, sink. The crust sinks basically because it's in tension, and you get all these faults. You see these geological faults here, and layers of sedimentary rock build up in the middle. And just now, our bit in the middle is wet. It's the Solway, but that's a sedimentary basin. Rather a technical slide, and I promise I won't do that to you again until we get to the back end of this. The final landform that we see around here, I think most people are aware, was sculpted by the Ice Age. With multiple phases of Ice Age actually over the last 2.5 million years. The last lot only retreated maybe 10,000 years ago from the upland parts of the Lake District and presumably the upland parts of southern Scotland as well. But you can see all these exciting arrows showing ice sweeping around, and you can imagine that actually the Solway must have captured a lot of ice and swept it out into this big Irish sea ice sheet that went charging down the Cumbrian and Lancashire coast. So that's the last big geological impact that's given us the shape of the land that we see today. Talk about rocky foundations here. Geologists look at the world in two parts, really. They think about bedrock, and you know bedrock when you hit it, it's hard stuff. And then superficial deposits, mostly soils, and most of you know what soils are. That's a simple division. Geologists also start at the oldest and work younger. So we start at the bottom here. And the Lake District rocks are nearly 500 million years old. They come close to the Solway. They get a mention here because they're close to my heart. And they're rather similar in age. Some of the rocks you'll hear about later from Nick in southern Scotland as well. The next big group of rocks is the Carboniferous, and the clue's in the name. We get all the coal measures. They're a strong feature of the West Cumbrian landscape or terrain. Then we have the Triassic, moving into dinosaur territory, 200 million years-ish, sandstone, shale, salts. These blanket the Solway offshore, the Solway seabed, below the seabed. But those are the kind of bedrock units that we're going to talk about. And I hope you've got some of the ideas of age. 500 million years, we don't actually see them on the coast, up to about 200 million years, which we do see on the coast. Then there's a huge break, with lots of geological history, which I'm not going to talk about. And we get the much younger sediments of the Quaternary, the Ice Age, glacial sediments. The Solway peat, which features in the AONB, is only about 10,000 years old, which is not much to a geologist. And I also like to include things like windblown sand, mobile marine deposits, salt flats, and alluvium. They're all geological formations, and they do play a bit in the story of the Solway. Okay, this is a look along the English coast from St. Bees Head, and I just like the picture. It disappears, Solway disappears into the mist as we get around the corner towards Port Carlisle over here. But you can see the town of Whitehaven, Workington, and Silloth. They're the local milestones. And Carlisle's over here in the murk somewhere. So I don't want you to be too put off by this one. It's a geological map published by the Geological Survey in the UK, and it shows lots of different colours. Ridiculously enough, it looks like the geology stops at the coast. I mean, the geology doesn't know the difference. Of course, it carries on under the sea, but many maps just do stop at the coast because it's difficult to map under the sea. But what we've got here, I like to point out that all this grey stuff is the Ordovician, ancient Lake District rocks, which start just sort of southeast of Cockermouth. Then we have this pink stuff. Well, getting an age sequence. All the grey stuff in here is the Carboniferous, including the coal measures. And the pink stuff is the Triassic bedrock, which is St. Bees Head and down the coast, and running right up over towards Carlisle, Longtown, and round into Scotland, actually. So those are the formations. All these other little lines are geological faults. You can see geologists decided which ones to put on the map. There's millions of faults around. They just try and put the ones that seem interesting on this map. One thing I would point out is that the English side looks totally different from the Scottish side, in colour at least. And we'll perhaps get onto that a little bit later on. But there's a dramatic difference between the two sides of the Solway. So if you can just carry that forward, please. So I'll just dwell on the Skiddaw groups. It's my favourite rock formation, and this is my stomping ground, Bassenthwaite Lake. And the foreground rocks here are the Skiddaw sedimentary rocks laid down off an ancient continent about 480 odd million years ago here, and then the volcanics are behind. I'm not going to talk about them too much. It's just to give a little bit of a hook between those ancient rocks approaching, well, over 400 million years old on both sides of the Solway. And I quite like the picture. Okay. The Solway coast, certainly at the seaward end, or the Irish Sea end, is dominated by industrial development, really. And the big one has got to be the coal measures, which run from Whitehaven to Maryport. And you can see them as grey and light grey, dark grey kind of features on here. Broadly speaking, I have to speak with a broad brush here, obviously. So coal measures, fantastic. There's the old Woodhouse colliery south of Whitehaven before it closed. And you can just see a tremendous thickness of productive coal there. This thing went out under the sea. So it's a real coastal story. And you can see the hydraulic props there. People are interested to hold the roof up. I won't go into mining techniques. I'm not an expert. Just a reminder of the industrial significance of Whitehaven as a major port in its day, with coal mines on top of the hill here at Kells. There's Hague Pit. You see the winding gear and things. Carboniferous rocks, a round number, let's call it 300 million years. Very few good outcrops, actually. There are some along these cliffs here, but I don't have any pictures of the outcrops of the rock. But anyway, Carboniferous played a huge part in the development of West Cumbria. Jumping forward now to this roughly 200 million year number, the Triassic Sandstones at St. Bees, and they're displayed fantastically well on the foreshore at Maryport by the promenade, but by the time you get to the golf course, they peter out and you don't see them up here. So I think a fair bit of this geological mapping is a little bit of guesswork, but it's buried under a lot of soil and things up here. Maybe a few boreholes help you put the story together, but the subsurface bedrock geology is probably quite uncertain in that part. Anyway, fantastic sandstones laid down in the middle of a very large ancient continent by water. These weren't laid down in the sea, they were laid down in the middle of a continent. And part of the sequence includes things like salt, where the water's evaporated, and there's also shaly rocks as well. But that's a rather nice picture. You can see the layers and layers of sandstone laid down back in Triassic times. If you haven't been to St. Bees, I'm sure many people have. It's always a fantastic trip, even if you don't look at the geology. Okay, now things get a bit more tricky as we go northeast beyond Maryport. So I've jumped actually quite a long way northeast in this picture. I just quite like this little Google Earth picture which shows the peat deposits actually, which I mentioned earlier on. The mosses up in the north there, only about 10,000 years old. But there's very little in the way of an outcrop. So you don't, the old houses up here weren't stone built. They were, was it dabbing? Somebody will tell me. They had to build from different materials up here because all the rock, as I say, peters out at Maryport. It disappears under all these nice soils with all agriculture. So we get a different style of geological map I've used up in the north here. There's Maryport. And this is basically all the different soils, the superficial deposits. Now we know what's at depth because it's like the Triassic Sandstone mainly, I think. We've got nice yellow is the alluvium down the river valleys. Bright green is the blown sand south of Silloth. This brownish color is alluvium. And then we've got this pale greeny blue is all the glacial deposits. So completely different geology and landscape once you get northeast of Maryport. I just like the picture of Groon Point. I think we've got mobile marine deposits here and probably some windblown sand, which has given us the spine here, and a nice view across to our chums in Scotland at Crefel there. Not a sign of a decent bit of rock anywhere. Mentioned the mosses, fantastic, interesting landscape, worth a visit if you haven't done it. I suspect most people have, but as I say, young geology actually. Salt marsh, completely different terrain. Some of it's intertidal, some of it floods. Often very soft and young muds. Is it temporary geology? Will it survive? I don't know. But I regard it anyway as a geological formation. And there's more around Carlisle. You can get the idea. When it says I fished here, I didn't fish here, I just pinched this online. Somebody else fished there. But it just shows the general low-lying terrain, no sign of rock, and not very far above sea level, most of it actually. I was out today, actually. I was out just with my grandson on this hill over here. We didn't make it to the top. He's not even 2 yet, so his little legs got tired. But these artificial geology, man-made, person-made, let's get it right. And I call it industrial landforming. So it's blast furnace slag from the heyday of steelmaking in Western Cumbria, which is linked to the local iron deposits inland and the abundance of coal, which you've heard about already. There's blast furnace slag had a tremendous influence on the landscape on this part of the coast. Let's call it west and south of Workington. And they look for all, well, like natural cliffs. And if you look at the little picture on the right here, on the left, sorry, some of these pieces look like volcanic lava, which is kind of what they are, except they come out of a blast furnace. So I just wanted to give a broader view. I got this phrase deep time, you have to excuse me, but I go back quite a long way just now. This is the last, I'm about to finish, this is the technical bit. Let's see, if I could draw your attention to this circular view of the globe, top left, that's the late Silurian, which is the age of some of the rocks that Nick's going to talk about actually. The world as it looked 420 million years ago. And you can see that England and parts of the Southern Ireland anyway are a separate mini-continent. And what's now Scotland and most of the rest of Ireland was another continent. And you may be familiar with plate tectonics or not, but continents over geological time move around. And at the time, we're well south of the equator. Now, it didn't look anything like it does today, of course. It was a completely different continent. And the Skiddaw rocks that we talked about were deposited in the sea off the north edge of this continent. And some of the ones that Nick's going to talk about were deposited in the sea off the south edge of that continent. What's now the Solway Basin, or the narrow Solway, is shown in this major cross-sectional diagram here. The red arrow, that's the width of it. You see the Lake District runs down here to the south-ish. And then you've got the southern uplands geology on the Scottish side, clearly. And a rather interesting diagonal black line. This is the line where two continents collided, something around 400 million years ago. The oceans between have disappeared. They've been pushed mostly underneath the ancient continents. And so Scotland and England are more or less separated by this ancient, call it a suture. Anyway, it's a joining point where the ancient continents collided. And that's one reason why the geology is completely different on the Scottish side from the English side. They started off in different continents. They happen to be close together nowadays. Okay, that was my technical bit. And I'm going to pause there. We'll take some questions later on, but it's my job to hand over to Nick, I think. It's all yours, Nick.
Thank you, Phil. I'll just share my screen. Oh, wasn't quite what I was expecting. Let's just start from there. So yes, this second part of the presentation takes a look at places on the Scottish side of the Solway that reveal the amazing rocks that shape our coast. And as Phil has just mentioned, the rocks on both sides are quite different, and the rocks that are deep beneath the sea, or the land in England, are exposed on our shore here at Back Bay of Monreath. A quick refresher on the geology map of the North Solway. The green colour are the sedimentary sandstones laid down in that ocean about 440 million years ago. The red blobs are granite intrusions, and then you can see along the coast that there's a light blue slither that are sedimentary rocks that are laid down in tropical shores about 340 million years ago. So the rocky shores that we have give us a peek at what lies beneath our feet further inland, and some places have spectacular landscapes, such as this is Needle's Eye near Sandy Hills. The granite outcrops between Rockcliffe and Auchencairn form surprisingly modest cliffs, but these are what attracted a geologist over 200 years ago. James Hutton wanted to test his theory that granite was once in a molten state, and he travelled around Scotland with his friend John Clark, and they were looking for veins of granite penetrating into surrounding rock. This illustration is from his journal and shows a vein that he was looking at near Creetown. Like many of us who visit Galloway, he was drawn to the coast, and he went to Sandy Hills. I don't think he was sunbathing. He was looking at the cliffs just at the background there, which have granite in them. And there he found proof that granite forced its way up through older rock. So Hutton changed the way we think about geology. He had a theory of Uniformitarianism. It's a long word, but basically it just shows us that processes that can be seen today are reflected in those that we can see in the geology of the past. So when we have a look at ripples on the shore like this, we can also find those same ripples in geology in stone that is exposed. So this is the sandstone that was laid down deep in the ocean floor, and you can see the ripples that show that it was once at the bottom of the sea. This is in fact at Rockcliffe, but you can see it in almost all the exposures of these stones. Another great geologist was Charles Lapworth, and he lived in Moffat and spent a lot of time studying graptolites. These were tiny little scratches in the rocks, but they evolve over time and change. And his studying meant that in the shales that he recognized that he could look at these and work out the sequence of layers of rocks. And really, it was his work that explained and showed people what the different layers were, and that these were once in the deep ocean. And here they've been upended, and that happened when these two continents collided. So the seafloor was scraped up and stacked and folded, and to create massive mountains that were the southern uplands, or are now the southern uplands. And these rocks can be seen all along the coast, and have this the seafloor is now vertically in the cliffs, making wonderful places for people to climb. Not so good if you're a nesting seabird, because of all the rocks are pointing up the way. As we go further east, then we come across this slither of Carboniferous rocks. And these were created on tropical seas and laid down in the time when the seas were changing. So we had shallow seas and swampy land. And sometimes we get these larger stones that are fixed in finer materials, and this is known as conglomerate or pudding stone, and can be found on the Cumberland coast as seen in this picture. So this tropical shore changed over time, and there was a sequence of fluctuating between shallow seas and swampy lagoons, and in these were laid down limestones and mudstones and sandstones, and these different layers can be seen on the coast. This is the Thurlestone Arch at Powillamont. This is a sandstone here. But also in this area, we can find lots of fossils. So there's lots of corals and shells, and also fragments of plants. So this here is a stem of an ancient tree fern. And these same rocks have been used by people to build buildings, great and small. These are the sandstones that have been used in Dundrennan Abbey. And they've also provided us with other materials, so for industrial use. This is an amazing place at Aird's Point near Auchencairn, and is a millstone quarry, but it was an intertidal millstone quarry. First, it might seem a bit odd that people quarried stone from a place that half the time was covered in sea, but I think there was method in their madness. There was two benefits. One was that you could drill holes and put dry timber into the holes, and then when the sea came back in, it swelled the timber and split the rock. But the other thing was when you're cutting out something as big as a millstone, then to have it on the shore, you could very easily load it into ships and export it elsewhere. There are many veins, mineral veins in the area, and there are a lot of copper mines on the coast, ancient copper mines. There was never very much mined from them, but it didn't stop people searching and taking out what they could. One of the minerals that is also in the same area is barytes. So this is a heavy material and is used for various different things, used in paint and used as a kind of weighting material and used in the oil industry. In fact, it's even used in playing cards to give them that bit of weight so that you can deal them easier. And well, certainly surprisingly for me, the most interesting is that there are also outcrops of rocks that have uranium in them. So this is Lot's Wife, and there's another Needle's Eye just behind there. This is at Merce Head, and these shapes have been created by the seas in the past. And this is where the uranium is, although not in big enough quantities to be exploited. So as Phil's already mentioned, the landscape that we see today has largely been shaped by ice. So glaciers have ground out the shape of the land. And in doing so, they've gouged out and transported rock and material. And some boulders have been moved great distances. So this here explains erratics like this one here, which is a granite boulder, which is sitting on Carboniferous rocks. Other people have different opinions as to how this occurred. It's called the devil stain, and that's because it's thought that the devil came along and took a big mouthful out of criffle, and unsurprisingly, it didn't taste very good, so he spat it out onto the shore here. And people point out that it must be true, because if you go to that rock there, you can see his teeth marks along the top of the stone. Some stones we find on beaches are actually distinctive enough to be able to be traced back to their place of origin. So this, in the West, you can often find pebbles of a bluish speckled microgranite, and this can be traced to Ailsa Craig. So we know that this pebble has been moved by ice from Ailsa Craig to a beach on Galloway. Occasionally tricks are played on us. This is Flint Bay in Kikubri Bay. And well, there certainly are lots of flints there, but they haven't been moved there by any geological process. In fact, there was a ship wrecked there and it was carrying flints on the ship. And so the stone there is actually a result of the shipwreck rather than any geological process. So as the glaciers moved along, they ground up rock and stones and transported it. And then when the ice melted, it left a layer all over the land, but can also be often exposed on the coast. And fluctuating sea levels from that time has also left many shore deposits like this at Newby Hills. And occasionally you find strange things in these deposits. So this is a big bone that I found on the shore. I was a bit worried that maybe it was an elephant that got out of its depth. But there's been some tests done and it has been shown to be a mammoth thigh bone, although we don't yet have a date. It hasn't been carbon dated yet, but we're hoping to get the results for that soon. So that was a really quick zoom through what I hope is an inspirational coastline. And I will now hand over back to Claire and Naomi so that they can ask questions.
There we are.
Great, thank you very much. That was really good, and that was quite nice to have a whistle-stop tour of both sides of the Solway. I'm going to start off with a couple of questions that actually Phil's already answered on the Q&A, but we'll just go through them because I suspect that not everybody will have seen the kind of answers. So there was the first question was from Steve. And he was asking what the blue dots on the glaciation map were. So Phil, if you wouldn't mind answering that one again, just for everybody else that might not have got that answer.
Okay, I answered these ones as they came in and listening to Nick at the
Sure.
same time. Yeah, the blue dots on the glaciation map, I compare them to watersheds. I think the lines of dots represent, let's call them glacier sheds. So they show the break of country, or the high bit of country, where the glaciers go from, let's say, some go to the east and some go to the right. So I think that's all they were, those blue dots. And I think the arrows play to that theory. Get difficult questions like this when you just pinch pictures off the internet, which is what I did. But
thank you. No, that's fine. Thanks. Naomi, I'll pass over to you.
Sorry, shall I? Sorry, I'm going to find it. We had a second question as well from Anne around the rocky scars or scores. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce them actually.
Yeah. Okay.
On the shore. Said to be glacial deposits, and she said that the groom is partly made of this too. Wondered if you had any further explanations. Sorry, it says my internet connection is a little unstable, so apologies if it's a bit funny. Secondary question from Anne is the huge limestone boulders, which are used as rock armour on lots of parts of the Cumbrian coast. She wondered where they came from. So there's kind of two sections to that question. But if you could just explain that again, Phil, I know you've already answered it.
Well, okay, yes, okay, a couple of things there. Yes, there are glacial deposits, mounds of glacial deposits called drumlins. I wouldn't be at all surprised if there isn't one helping to form that landscape at Groom Point, but I can't give it a definitive answer either way. On the limestone, yeah, there's limestone boulders all along the Cumbrian coast for rock armour, and there's several big limestone quarries in Western Cumbria. There's a rather large one near Frisington, there's another one near Moota, there's one near Brigham, actually, where I live here, and they generally used pulverized as aggregate or roadstone or something, but they do get some nice big stones which are big enough, you know, a couple of tons each, perhaps even for rock armoring. There is almost a circle of limestone right around the outside of the Lake District. Obviously, it doesn't quite make a circle because the sea gets in the way, but if you look at a geological map, there's a blue arc swings right round all the way from sort of near Whitehaven, right round towards the Pennines and right round in South Lakes. And it's because the limestone once probably covered the Lake District, but the middle bit has been domed up. Imagine it coming up in a big dome as the crust gets distorted. The top's got eroded off, left this fantastic ring of limestone around the Lake District. So I threw in a bit of Lake District geology there just for free.
Great. And so there's a question from Bill here, which it's probably for both of you, but Nick, I'll ask you first. Is there anything particular unique about the Solway that's not present anywhere else? So do you get the divil everywhere across Britain, or is it just in the Solway that we have the divil biting bits?
No, the devil's definitely everywhere.
Devil's everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, not just in the House of Commons. He's obviously been up to Glasgow because is it a devil's tail or somebody that calls the Wangi, a geological feature up there? Yeah, he's everywhere.
Devil's tail, goodness me.
Anything particularly that is unique about the Solway?
Well, I think certainly the seeing the rocks that have been upended by the collision of the two continents and so clearly visible in many of the cliffs on the Solway, and those create some spectacular seascapes or beachscapes that you can see. So I think that's probably
they look quite amazing, don't they?
Yeah, I'd echo that. The Scottish side, from a solid geology point of view, is really fantastic. Lots to see, and most of the rocks are up on end, one way or the other. I showed you some at St Bees. They were after the collision of the continents, but the ones in Scotland got caught up in the collision of the continents, which is why they're all up on end. So it's not unique, but it's a very distinctive feature. And there's lots of very distinctive features about the Solway. I'm sure it is altogether a unique environment.
Great, thank you.
Put all bits together.
Thanks.
We've got, do you want me to go to the next one? We've got a couple more questions here, which is really good. So one from Jackie Hastewell. This is one for Phil, really, but it may be applicable. Well, it will. I'm sure it will be applicable to Nick as well. Can you recommend any good sites to go fossil hunting on the Cumbrian side of the Solway? I don't know if that's something that you know about, Phil.
I'm not a big fossil buff, and I don't really approve of geological hammers, so excuse me, but it doesn't really matter what you do on the beach, because they just wreck things. If you have a hammer, you hit things. If you look online at fossils and Parton is near Whitehaven, there's a lot of fossils on the beach at Parton, which have largely come from the limestone that's been brought in. But apparently, somebody told me yesterday, I was doing some geological mapping in the Lake District. Somebody just mentioned that they take their children there or others there just to see what's what. So if you look online, there's a fossil hunting website, and I can't remember its name, but if you Google fossils in Parton,
I've certainly been to Parton because I've got a brother who's a big fossil hunter, and he'd already found it from Denmark. That was the place to go. So we've certainly been there fossil hunting, but we didn't have any hammers with us.
No, it's
okay. At least
I didn't. I don't really care about beaches quite so much as I do classic outcrops inland, which have got scientific interest, and they need to be available to future generations. We just shouldn't just go smashing these things. So.
Yeah, sure.
I think that's an important point, isn't it, around conservation as well. I mean, I guess, fossil hunting can be done completely without hammers, just searching sort of, especially on the coastline on quarries or, but it's a really good point to say, let's leave everything as we find it really.
Yeah. I don't take any samples home now.
Yeah.
Early on I did, and I found I got lots of old samples in the garage and never looked at them. That's a shame, isn't it? So leave only footsteps, or whatever they say.
Yeah.
And on the Scottish side, there's very few places that you can find fossils, but the best place by far is between Powillimont, which is near Southerness, between there and Carsthorne, where these Carboniferous outcrops are. And as has already been said, you really shouldn't take a hammer along there to collect any, but there are plenty that are washed up on the shore there, and you can find corals and shells and bits of plant. And it's well worth going to have a look just to see the corals in situ. But yes, please don't remove them.
Yes, I mean, beware of the SSSIs and the AONBs. Naturally, they've all got sensible restrictions on them. So I'm a great believer in taking a camera, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
So in fact, the answer to that question is really, you've got to come over to the Scottish side and have a look at our corals.
Absolutely.
Sorry, Naomi.
No, sorry, James, you jumping there. I'm just posted a little comment in the chat to say lots of fossils in the limestone rock armour and pebbles on the west side of Groon Point. So obviously the limestones come from a little bit further afield, but if you are wanting to go and have a look at that, that's a really good tip. So thank you, Anne, for that little tip. So easy to get to if you're having a day out in Silloth as well. So.
And kind of following on from that, actually, there's a question from Alison in the chat about, do you think that the Groon is doomed ultimately, and if so, what sort of time frame would that be in?
It's definitely doomed. But I wouldn't worry about it for a few thousand years. I've got no idea.
As long as that, right?
Well,
okay.
I mean, let's face it, the seashore changes twice a day, and the back of the seashore changes with the storm several times a year. But I think the central part of it has got certainly hundreds of years in it. And I don't want to ad-lib too much. So, but it's clearly, I'd say the coastal part of it's probably getting deposited as fast as it's getting eroded just now. But geology will catch up with it in the end.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That's all the questions in the Q&A, but Naomi, did you have
a question?
Yep. Go on.
I'll just see that there's another question. A couple of comments. Presumably, sorry, just an additional comment from Steve Trotter. Presumably, Groon will move with the sea level if the supply of sediment continues. So that's another comment there. I don't know if that's something to add to your answer or.
Sorry, I'm just.
Anne also put in the thing that she didn't actually use a hammer when she went to Groon with students. So
I'm very pleased. Yeah. I'm very pleased. Thank you. So what was the last question?
Sorry, Steve from Cumberland Valley Trust said, presumably the Groon Point will move with the sea level if the supply of sediment continues. I'm assuming he's meaning that right. Obviously you've got the waiver and the one pool kind of entering out. So there's quite a lot of coastal processes on Groon.
I think
contribute to the fact that it'll, there's accretion and decretion
absolutely
as well going on. Is that
absolutely? I'm sure it's quite dynamic, but at the core of it, let's face it, it's got a 1940s pillbox which looks pretty good on top. I think the core of it is there, but it'll change a lot around the edges. But I say I don't really want to ad lib on live geomorphology, but it is a vulnerable area, and I'm sure it's getting deposited. Part of it as fast as it's getting eroded. But all these things, bear in mind that the Lake District we're looking at has about 3 miles of rock has been worn off it over geological time. That's height. So, bear that sort of thing in mind. We missed, there's a lot of land missing, but I'm sure Groen's got certainly hundreds of years, if not thousands, but I'm only ad-libbing.
Yeah. Do you want to go next, Claire? Because we've got a few more questions going in now, actually, which is really good. I think people are...
Yeah, sure. So Helen was asking if there's any easy to read books published on the shaping the Solway Coast, especially for the North Solway, but they live in the South as well. So I suppose that's just, a recommendation of something that a beginner could perhaps pick up.
Yeah.
What have you got on your shelves, Phil?
I've got my own book, of course, but I'm not going to sell you one just now. There's, obviously, I always say start with Google. There are excellent regional guides published by the British Geological Survey. There's one for Northern England, and there's one for Southern Scotland. And they do get a bit technical, but they're beautifully produced with lots of pointers for classic bits of geology to go and look at. So that's the easiest answer. But also, as I say, look at the Solway Partnership website, which I found rather good the other day.
Well, that's
not being funny.
Nick wrote it.
I'm not being funny about it, but why not start there? And if you want to invest in some books, the British Geological Survey regional guides, and actually they publish all full marks, and they publish all the text online as well, and most of the diagrams and photos. I forgot, it's called Earthwise, I think. So you can go and buy the book, or you can go and look at all the pages. And,
there's also an excellent excursion guide for Southwest Scotland, and it has different excursions to different places, and some of them are much more geological and scientific than others. But it's a really, really good book if you're wanting to find good sites to visit.
Yeah, you'll find lots online, I think. But,
and Anne has also put in the chat that there's always a fresh in the salt, the story of the Solway by Anne Lungard.
There we are.
So we'll just give that a bit of a push for Anne there.
go for Anne. And that's a very human sort of landscape point of view. So actually, and quite seriously, if people are looking at something that is much more sort of holistic, then Anne's book is going to have kind of like lots and lots of that kind of stuff in it. So it'd be good port of call, really.
Naomi, do you want to ask that?
Yeah, sorry, it's my turn. Yeah, we've gone to pot, haven't we, for the right. We had a couple of questions on the chat. Let me just check that we haven't. Right, okay, we've got one more question because a couple of people have put something in the chat. Is there a difference in building styles and quarry stone, building stone between the north side and the south side of the Solway Firth? So that's probably a question to both panelists here, both speakers.
Do you want to go first, Nick?
Yep. So on the Scottish side, because we've got this sedimentary rock that has been upended, it's actually a very hard, brittle sandstone. It's not really very good for building with, and of course we've got the granites, which are very hard to work with. So a lot of the buildings use sandstones, and surprisingly, actually, well, not surprisingly, because it's only just across the sea, quite a lot of buildings are built with sandstone from the English side, as well as the sandstones that are not really exposed on the coast, but are available in and around, say, Dumfries, Lockerbriggs, and that kind of thing. So the buildings very much reflect the stones that are beneath the ground, but beware that there are some that are brought in that are easier to use or look more handsome.
Yeah, if I could just talk about the English side, the obvious one, if you start thinking about it, is this reddish brown sandstone, which pops up on the Scottish side as well, which I think is probably what Nick was talking about. The Triassic Sandstones, a bit like the St. Bees sandstone, in fact, including the St. Bees sandstone. And it's used widely in Cumbria, and it's often mixed with the Lake District rocks. If you go to some places, you've got dark grey Lake District rocks in the national park, and then you've got the coins down the side of the buildings are in red sandstone, or the lintels or the window frames. So they get mixed, which is quite fun. But that red sandstone finds its way around the world. Liverpool Cathedral, United States. It's quite a famous building stone, and there's a whole raft of it goes off down the Eden valley there as well, and huge amounts of it in central England. But it does feature quite strongly in the local building around here. Well, my own house is made out of a Carboniferous sandstone, which is slightly older, and it's grey. I just live near the limestone actually, but my house is mostly a grey Carboniferous limestone, and most of the houses around here are. But if they're not rendered, you often can see bits of Lake District rocks mixed in. So that's the story. It's different on both sides of the Solway, but the red brown stuff you see everywhere.
Great, thank you. There's another question in the Q&A, which was from Donald, who is talking about a large boulder on the Portland shore, which its surface was covered in small, hard black bubbles, and he's just wondering if it was uraninite. Could that be possible?
It's be pronounced.
I don't even know how to pronounce it, sorry. Some sort of uranium deposit, I imagine.
Question, Claire.
Well, do you want to have a go, Nick? I think this is a tricky one, actually.
Yes, I'm not sure. So certainly the outcrop of the uranium-bearing rocks are mostly just around at Merce Head there, at Needles Eye, and I think it's a sort of pitch blend. It's a sort of shiny black rock. So I'm not really sure what it is that's on the shore that Donald's speaking about.
He does say he's got a photograph, but he's just not able to send it at the moment. Maybe you could send that to us later, Donald, and Nick can have a look. Nick can have a look at it.
Yeah, if you do that, then I can have a look.
Is that all the questions?
I have to answer my question. Sorry, I think that's all the questions. Let me just check that we haven't.
Well, there was one that I think there was in this. Somebody was asking in the chat which of the one or two spots in each area would be the best for kind of a very basic level geology to see, to go with kind of like kids or young adults. Nick, do you want to just give like a one?
Yeah, I would say two places. Go to Back Bay of Monreath, where you get these amazing cliffs where you can really see the vertical strata, and there's lots of interesting caves and wildlife to see there as well. So, but make sure you go at low tide, because otherwise you'll see nothing. And the other place would be to go along the shore beyond Cast Thorn and have a look at the pebbles on the shore there, and you're bound to find fossils of one kind or another, but maybe have a look up first to see what you're looking for, because it's easy to miss these sort of bits of coral and things that are there.
Great, thank you. Phil, what do you think? You're on mute, Phil.
On the Lake District side, I'd say just around the corner from the Solway, I go to St Bees Beach, which is a brilliant spot. I'm there at least once a month just to get a nice bit of fresh air. But if you look at the sea, if you turn right, you've got the red sandstone cliffs of the Triassic, and you can see all the bedding structures in it, which I'm not going to try and describe by waving my hands around, and something called sand volcanoes, which you can Google. So looking on the right-hand side, you've got the Triassic sandstones, and of course they go for miles around the cliffs if you want to have a look, but you can get up close and personal on the beach. If you go left, you're passing these endless landslips below the golf course, which shows a lot of glacial sediments, sands and gravels and layers of coal. And so you can look at landslip, which is quite an interesting thing to understand landslips and see a real one, or many real ones. And it's something called a push moraine. And I'll let you Google what a push moraine is as well. It's really quite an interesting glacial feature. So for a one-stop shop with an ice cream at the end, go to St Bees Beach.
Sounds good to me.
Sounds good.
So I think we've covered, unless Naomi, have you got any other questions? Sorry.
Yeah, it was just I had a few questions up the sleeve, but I won't carry on with some of them concerned. But just one of the things that came to mind is that, with this, obviously, as part of our work with the Solway Coast Day, when we talk a lot about landscape conservation, and a lot of the time we focus a lot on nature conservation and kind of built heritage conservation. Is there anything that you can think that we should be, in your view, what should we be looking to conserve from a geological point of view, really sort of within the Solway Coast A and B, if anything? That's really to Phil, really. I don't know if it's a bit of a big question.
Yeah,
Your views?
I personally, I don't think it needs conserving. It can look after itself. But the foreshore at Maryport is a fantastic thing. Never mind geology, it's just sculptural in the sandstones.
Yeah.
I recommend that to lots of people. If you haven't been, take a look at it and just think of it as sculpture. As I say, beyond that, not so easy. Clearly, the moss, the peats are already protected, I guess, I hope, because they're features of value. Beyond that, I don't think there's anything particularly outstanding, apart from the fact it is an outstanding landscape. Nice picture of Groon there, for example. But off the cuff, I can't think of any actual sort of world-class things to protect that are that unique that you haven't got them somewhere else. But say the peat and that sandstone is actually a fantastic outcrop to see.
That's great, thank you. That's really useful to get your views on that, actually. So thanks very much. I think that's it from now. I don't know if that would be a good sort of place to finish, Claire, unless you've got any questions.
No, I think that's fine. So so I'll just like to say thanks very much, Nick and Phil, for kind of giving up your time, your evening, and a sunny evening as well, to kind of spread that knowledge. It's been really, really fascinating, and I'm sure there'll be kind of people kind of getting in touch to find out a bit more. And I know there was certainly one person in the chat asking about potential field trips, so that might be something that we can perhaps follow up in future, is trying to organise kind of a field trip to one or both sides of the Solway. And various people are saying thanks and that they've enjoyed it and it's been really useful. So I'm sure everybody has found it really good. Thank you, Naomi.
It's been good fun, thanks.
I think I found it really useful, just that whole fact about the two continents. And I always wondered why the Scottish side of the Solway and the English side of the Solway so different. So that's been like a really interesting thing from my point of view to kind of learn that, really. So the other thing is, I just want to say, just to do a little bit of a plug really from Phil's point of view, is that if you are interested, and a few people have posted that they'd like to find out a bit more about the geology of Cumbria and Solway, you can join the Cumberland Geological Society. There is a website, and I'll just post that in the chat. Try and multitask, which is a difficulty. Just a good way to find out a bit more about the landscape as well. I think the membership fees are pretty small, and there's lots of opportunities when things get up and running again to kind of go out on field trips and things like that. So I think hopefully, that's something to follow up.
We're currently planning a summer field trip season, and I'm leading at least one of them. Mostly in the Lake District, but we're trying to get outside the Lake District as well. So great. It's only £15, I think, to be a member.
It's a bargain.
Yeah.
What can you buy for £15 now? I'll just post it. I'm going to post a link now. I'll just post it to all panelists by mistake. You've all got a link now anyway. So I don't know if there's anything on the Scottish side. Nick, do you have any geological societies on the North Solway? You're not sure,
No, I don't know. There was a geological group, but I don't know if it's still in existence. Yeah, I'll have to find out.
We maybe need to do something at Solway Firth Partnership. We maybe need to try and work up a project for doing more about coastal geology. Yeah, that's what we need to do.
There you go. We've got a few actions there, haven't we? So
can I give you another plug, Naomi?
Of course you can. We like them.
For those no longer in full-time employment, there's the U3A. There's the organisation called U3A, which has geology groups, and certainly the Cockermouth one is pretty busy. I used to run that one, and I'm still active in it. So there are various ways you can get involved in geology and field trips. And field trips don't have to be too scientific. They could be a nice day out. Somebody's having a go. The ice creams and St. Bees thing I can see there. So
you're really selling it, Phil.
You can tell I just enjoy getting out and doing it. It's better than watching TV.
Good to get out and about, isn't it, into the landscape? So yeah, that's great. So just to sort of finally, we will finish in a minute. This is going to be the last for now of our monthly or semi-monthly cross-border webinars. So thank you for everyone who's come along to some of them, and we've had a fairly regular attendance. We've got the same people to quite a lot of them, and some really different people too, and some international people too, which has been absolutely brilliant. So just decided to hold fire on it for now. It's a lighter night to hear. People can move around a little bit more. So we'll see how we get on later in the year. But we really hope that you've enjoyed this programme. We really have actually. It's been a really, really interesting thing for us to do. And just a quick reminder that if you've missed any of them over the last few months, you can watch them again on YouTube. There's a link on both the Solway Firth Partnership websites and the Solway Coast A&B websites to watch them again. So any feedback you've got, just reply, post it here, or just reply to our info@solwaycoasta1b address, or Facebook.
Ours is the same. Yeah.
Sorry, same for Claire.
Get that in there.
We're fighting, aren't we, to get up? And just finally, we hope you've really enjoyed it, and we hope you have a really lovely summer with lots of sunshine and getting out and about and feeling inspired by the landscape on both sides of the Solway. Thanks to our speakers as well. It's been great.
Yeah. And just finally, if anybody has any topics that they'd really like us to do some webinars on, maybe next autumn, winter, then feel free to give us a shout and make some suggestions, and we'll try and get some speakers organised for you. Great, thank you very much. So have a safe rest of the, I always say safe journey home, but of course nobody's really journeying home, but have a nice rest of the evening, and we'll see you sometime soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Thanks very much.
Good night.
Bye. Good night.